We're going to continue adding and subtracting rationals. Remember from letter C, what we were doing is we were looking at trinomials and factoring them. But sometimes what we have are binomials, and we can actually factor those. Right here, what we have is we have a difference of squares. That's the special factoring pattern, when we could take the square root of each one. So when we factor this, we get x minus 1 and x plus 1. So if we're looking closely, we have an x minus 1, we have an x minus 1. This one has an x plus 1. So our common denominator is x minus 1 and x plus 1. So that means for our first term, it already has the x minus 1, x plus 1. So there's nothing to multiply it by. So we're just going to bring down the 5x. For the second one, it has an x minus 1, but if we're looking closely, it's missing an x plus 1. So we have to multiply it by an x plus 1. Now it has the common denominator, and we distribute the 5 to each of the terms. 5x plus 5. Now, if we're looking closely, 5x minus 5x, they cancel, they become 0. And then what we have is a 5. But remember, just like before, when we have a subtraction sign in the front, that means that that's going to become a negative 5. And then what we have is x minus 1, x plus 1. So that right there is our first answer. We simplified it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to state our excluded values. When we're stating our excluded values, we're going to be looking for what gives us 0 in the denominator. So when we're looking closely, we see that x cannot equal 1 and negative 1. Now looking at letter E, what we see is another special factoring pattern. When we could take the square root of each one, it becomes x minus 3 and x plus 3. Notice, if we're looking closely, there's an x plus 3 and x plus 3. This one also has an x minus 3, so our common denominator is x minus 3, x plus 3. X minus 3, x plus 3. That right there is our common denominator. Now, if we're looking at our first term, it has the x plus 3. It's missing the x minus 3. So if we're looking down below, x plus 3, it's missing an x minus 3. So that means we're multiplying an x minus 3. So when we multiply it or distribute the 2, what we get is 2x minus 6. This one has the x minus 3. It has the x plus 3. It's not missing anything, so we bring down the 4. So we're looking for our like terms. We see that we have a 2x. There's no other x's on the other side, so we bring down the 2x. Negative 6 plus 4 is negative 2. And what we notice is that they have a 2 in common. So what we're going to do is we're going to factor out a 2. And what we have is 2, in parentheses, x minus 1, x minus 3, x plus 3. That right there is our first answer. Now what we're going to do is we're going to find our excluded values. Once again, excluded values is what gives us 0 for the denominator. So if we're looking at our denominator, it would be 3 and negative 3. Remember, it's always opposites. So I'm going to put plus or minus 3. And that would be my second answer. Now for our last one, we're going back to a trinomial. We're looking for two numbers that multiply together give us negative 12. Add up to negative 1. That would be negative 4 and 3. So underneath it, I'm going to write an x minus 4 and an x plus 3. When I'm looking at my common denominator, I see that there's an x plus 3 and an x minus 4. Doesn't matter the order that we put it. x plus 3, x minus 4. For the first term, it has the x plus 3. It's missing an x minus 4. So what I'm going to do is I am going to multiply it by the x minus 4. And when I do that, I get 10x minus 40. If we're looking at this one, it has the x minus 4. It has the x plus 3. So bringing down the 2x. 10x plus 2x gives me 12x. And then I have a negative 4. Now, when I'm looking at this, what I notice is that they have a 4 in common. So I'm going to factor out a 4. I get 3x minus 10. That gives me my first answer. Now, for my second answer, once again, excluded values is what gives me 0 for the denominator. So I'm just looking at my denominator. What would I plug in there to give me a 0? It's the opposite, negative 3. What would I plug in here to give me a 0? It would be the opposite. That would be 4.